The first bullet grazed his shoulder plate and he barely flinched. Corporal Danny Reeves did not have time to think about that. He was already moving, boots sliding through the rust-colored mud of Kethvara's lower district, one arm wrapped tight around the small alien child, the other gripping his rifle with a sweaty, desperate hand. The boy could not hear the shots. He could not hear the screaming either. His wide, amber eyes just kept staring up at Danny with a look so calm it was almost terrifying. 7 seconds ago, everything had been quiet. Now it was not. The explosion that had taken out the north wall of the refugee shelter had come without warning. No alarm, no countdown, just a deep crack in the air and then fire and dust, and the sound of people falling. Danny had been inside doing a medical inventory check when the blast knocked him off his feet. He hit the cot behind him, rolled, and came up already reaching for the boy, Sale. The shelter workers called him, who had been sitting cross-legged on the floor doing nothing but staring at a cracked piece of reflective metal like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Sale had not moved, he had not screamed, he had not run. He just looked up at Danny with those amber eyes and waited. Danny grabbed him, pulled him in and ran. The shelter door was blocked by a collapsed beam. Danny went left, found a gap in the outer wall where the blast had punched through and squeezed through it into the open street. That was when the second shot came. It hit the wall 3 inches from his head. He dropped low, shielded the boy with his body, and started moving again. The group that attacked the shelter was not military. Danny had seen enough organized soldiers to know the difference. These were scavengers or something hired quickly and armed poorly. Their shots were wide, their positions sloppy, but sloppy did not mean harmless. A bad shot still kills. He counted 4 of them as he cut around the corner of a collapsed market stall, 2 on the elevated walkway above, 2 on ground level moving to cut him off. His radio crackled, but the signal was broken, full of static and fragments of voices that meant nothing. Backup was not coming in the next 60 seconds, and 60 seconds was all he had. Danny found a narrow channel between 2 storage structures and pressed himself into it, the boy tucked against his chest. Sale was light, lighter than any child his apparent age should have been, and his skin was faintly warm, like something always running just a little hot. He pressed his small hands against Danny's jacket and held on without being told. Smart kid. The footsteps came close. Danny counted 3 breaths, then moved. He took the first ground-level attacker with the butt of his rifle before the man even turned. The second one swung wide and Danny ducked under it, drove an elbow and put him down hard. Then he was running again, because the 2 on the walkway above had angles on the street and he had no cover worth trusting. Third shot came from behind. 4th and 5th from the left almost simultaneously. He felt the burn across his lower leg and knew one had clipped him, but the leg held and he kept moving. The boy made no sound. He simply held on tighter. The Port Authority building was 2 blocks north. It had reinforced walls, a locked gate, and most importantly, a garrison of 3 Allied soldiers that Danny had spoken to just that morning over bad coffee. If he could reach it, they were safe. If he could not reach it, the math got very ugly very fast. He cut right down an alley that smelled like old machine oil and wet stone. One of the walkway shooters had come down to street level and was following. Danny could hear the boots, uneven rhythm, someone not used to running hard. He went faster anyway. The gate of the Port Authority building came into view. The lights above it were still on. Danny raised his voice and called the code phrase they had agreed on that morning, the one that meant friendly approach under fire, and he did not stop running while he said it. 6th shot, it hit the gate post and sparked. He heard the lock disengage. The gate swung inward. He went through it without slowing, turned, pushed it shut, and leaned against it while the garrison soldier on the other side threw the bolt. It was quiet inside. Danny slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold floor. The boy in his arms looked up at him, reached out one small hand, and touched Danny's jaw very lightly with the tips of his fingers, the way someone touches something they are not sure is real. Danny laughed, once short and breathless. "Yeah," he said, "me too, kid." Sale could not hear him, but something in his face shifted just slightly, and for a moment it looked almost like relief. The garrison medic came over 2 minutes later and told Danny the clip on his leg was not deep, painful but clean. He would walk fine by morning. Danny nodded and looked at the boy, who had not moved from his side, who was now sitting with his small back pressed against Danny's arm like a wall he had chosen to trust. Outside, the district was still burning. The radio was still broken, and somewhere far above, in the upper towers of Kethvara, someone had watched everything happen through a scope that Danny did not know existed. The medic's name was Pete Calloway, and he was the kind of person who hummed while he worked, low and tuneless, like background noise he had forgotten was coming from him. Danny sat still on the cot while Pete cleaned the leg wound with something that stung sharply and smelled like antiseptic mixed with something floral, which Pete explained was a local compound that helped with the particular bacteria common to Kethvara's lower districts. The boy, Sale, had not left Danny's side. He sat on the edge of the cot with his legs dangling and watched Pete's hands with the same focused, unblinking attention he had given the reflective metal scrap earlier. Curious. Cataloging everything. One of the garrison soldiers, a woman named Kara Holt, came in and crouched down in front of Sale. She held up a food packet, the kind that came in bright colors specifically so children from almost any species would recognize it as safe. Sale looked at it. Then he looked at Danny. Danny nodded. Sale took the packet. "He reads faces well," Kara said, looking at Danny with a raised eyebrow. "Deaf since birth, from what the shelter staff told me," Danny said. "He communicates through touch signals and expression. The shelter had a worker who knew the local sign system, but I don't think anyone else there did." "And now the shelter is gone," Kara said. It was not a question, so Danny did not answer it like one. He just looked at the ceiling for a moment and let the weight of that sit. Pete finished wrapping the leg and straightened up. "You took a burn, but nothing structural. Keep it dry, rest it tonight. I'll check it in the morning." "Thank you," Danny said. Pete hummed something that might have been an acknowledgement and moved off to the next task. The garrison radio was working better than Danny's field unit. The signals were clearer in the building's interior. He spent 20 minutes piecing together what had happened from the broken transmissions and the reports Kara pulled up on her screen. The attack on the shelter had not been isolated. 3 other points in the lower district had been hit in the same window, all civilian support locations, all tied to the ongoing relief effort coordinated through the Allied presence on Kethvara. Someone had planned it, or something had, and the planning was not as unsophisticated as the execution had been. Wide shots and sloppy movement did not mean weak intelligence. It meant cheap hired muscle, which actually meant something more deliberate behind it. Danny did not like the picture that was assembling itself in his head. He was still looking at it, turning it over, when the garrison's outer sensor array pinged. Kara moved to the console, read the incoming data, and turned to look at Danny with an expression he had learned to read as controlled surprise. "Vessel incoming," she said. "Upper tier, non-military designation, but it's got a clearance code at the top of the authentication tree." Danny stood up slowly, careful with the wrapped leg. "Who uses that tier of code?" Kara looked at the screen again, then back at him. "According to the registry. The Royal Administrative Fleet." The room went quiet in a particular way. Pete stopped humming. The vessel did not land at the garrison. It settled in the transit plaza 2 streets over, which was technically a civilian zone but large enough for the size the sensors indicated. Danny looked at Kara. She looked at him. Sale looked at both of them, then put another bite of the food packet in his mouth and chewed thoughtfully. "I should go see what that is," Danny said. "You have a leg wound," Pete said from across the room. "It's a burn, you said so yourself." Pete made a sound that communicated both agreement and disapproval at the same time, which was impressive. Danny checked his rifle, found it serviceable, and moved toward the door. He stopped when he felt a small hand close around two of his fingers. He looked down. Sale was standing behind him, holding on, looking up at him with those amber eyes set in a face that had already decided where it was going. "You can't come with me," Danny said. Sale did not let go. "Kara," Danny said. Kara came over and knelt in front of the boy. She spoke to him quietly, not expecting him to hear but making her face and gestures clear. "Stay here, safe. Come back soon." Sale watched her face with complete attention. Then he looked at Danny. Then carefully, deliberately, he let go of Danny's fingers and sat back down on the cot. It felt like a decision, not an obedience. Like a small person making a reasoned choice rather than following a command. It stayed with Danny as he walked out of the garrison and into the street. The plaza was lit by the vessel's landing lights, a pale blue-white that made everything look slightly underwater. The ship was sleek and longer than Danny had expected, built in the style common to the administrative class of Kethvara's ruling structure, smooth lines, no visible weapon mounts, but reinforced in ways that Danny's trained eye could pick out if he looked at the angles correctly. It was not unarmed. It just did not advertise. A ramp had extended from the vessel's lower section. Standing at the base of it were two figures in formal attire, dark layered fabric with geometric patterns at the collar and cuffs, and between them, a third figure who was clearly not staff. She was tall by Kethvaran standards, which put her a head above Danny. Her coloring was deeper than most he had encountered in the lower district, a rich amber brown that shifted faintly in the landing light, and her eyes were amber too, darker than the boy's, more like old copper. She wore nothing ceremonial, but everything she wore was precise, fitted, intentional. She moved toward him without waiting for him to come closer, which was either confidence or impatience or both. She stopped 4 feet from him and looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they already know a great deal about. "You are Corporal Daniel Reeves," she said. Her accent shaped the syllables differently, but the words were clear. "Of the Allied Relief Contingent." "I am," Danny said. "You carried my nephew out of the shelter attack this evening." It was not a question. Her voice was very even, which Danny recognized as the voice of someone who was very good at keeping what they felt away from what they said. He looked at her, then he understood. The amber eyes, the way Sale had held on without being told, the way he had let go when he chose to. "He is safe," Danny said. "He is in the garrison building, 2 streets north." Something moved in her face, fast and controlled, but he caught it. "I was told," she said quietly, "that you took fire 8 separate times during the extraction." Danny thought about it. Something like that. I wasn't counting carefully. She studied him with an expression he could not fully read. "Bring him to me, please." He noted the please. It was not something that came easily to someone used to giving instructions that did not require softening. She had said it anyway. "Come with me," Danny said. "It's safer to walk to the garrison than to bring him back out here." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, once, and fell into step beside him. They walked the 2 streets in silence. Danny's leg ached steadily but not badly. The fires in the district had died down to distant orange smudges. The city above them was lit in layers, the upper towers glowing, the lower district dark in patches where the grid had failed. Kethvara was not at war, not officially, but it felt like something that had been told it was not at war and had decided to do whatever it wanted with that information. Kara met them at the garrison door. Her expression did not flicker when she saw who was with Danny, but he could tell she had immediately recognized the woman. She stepped aside without a word and let them in. Sale was still on the cot. When he saw the tall woman in the doorway, something happened in his face that Danny had not seen before. It was not surprise. It was more like something that had been held tight, letting go all at once. He slid off the cot and crossed the room in 4 quick steps and wrapped both arms around her waist, and she bent down and put her arms around him and held on, and for a few seconds neither of them moved at all. Danny looked away to give them that. Pete had started humming again, very quietly, facing the other direction. When Danny looked back, The woman was standing straight again. Sale was at her side, her hand on his shoulder. She looked at Danny. "I am Veth Allah," she said, "administrator of the northern territories of Kethvara," she paused, "and his only living family." Danny nodded. He did not know what the correct response was, so he went with the honest one. "I'm glad he's all right." Veth Allah looked at him for a long moment. Something had shifted in her expression, something she had not fully locked away in time. "As am I, Corporal," she said, "as am I." They gave Danny a room in the Port Authority building that night. Technically a storage space that had been cleared out and fitted with a cot, and a lamp that hummed faintly and flickered once every few minutes with the reliability of something that had been doing it for years and saw no reason to stop. He did not sleep much. The leg ached. The radio transmissions were still patchy. Somewhere in the city, whatever had organized the attacks was either celebrating or regrouping, and Danny had spent enough time in enough places to know which one was more likely. He was awake before dawn, sitting up and looking at the wall, when Kara knocked and opened the door without waiting for an answer, which was her way of indicating something had changed. "Veth Allah wants to speak with you," she said, formally. Danny looked at her, formally. She sent a written request, on actual paper with a seal. He rubbed the back of his neck. "All right." The meeting was held in the garrison's small conference room, which had a table, 4 chairs, and a window that looked out onto the transit plaza where Veth Allah's ship was still sitting. She was already there when Danny arrived. Sale was with her, sitting in the chair beside hers, doing something with a small piece of wire he had found from somewhere, bending it into shapes with quiet patience. Veth Allah stood when Danny entered. She waited for him to sit before she sat, which was a courtesy he had not expected and noted carefully. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want to do it without the intermediary language of official communication, because official communication removes things that matter." "All right," Danny said again. He seemed to be saying that a lot in her presence. It felt like the honest word for how he kept receiving information he had not anticipated. "The attack last night was not random," she said. "The 3 other locations were chosen because they were connected to the supply chain for the relief shelters. Whoever organized it understood the network well enough to select targets that would disrupt operations rather than simply cause damage. The shelter where Sale was staying was chosen specifically because it was a coordination point for the northern distribution route." Danny leaned forward slightly. "That's a level of intelligence access that suggests someone inside the system." "Yes," Veth Allah said. "And Sale was there because I placed him there," she said. Her voice stayed even. "The Royal Administrative Offices have been under political pressure for several months. There were threats that I assessed as credible but manageable. I thought the shelter, tied to the Allied relief effort and therefore under a degree of Allied protection, was safer than keeping him in the upper towers where the threats were more directly pointed." She stopped. "I was wrong about the shelter being a target." The admission sat in the room quietly. It was not easy to make, and she had made it without flinching. "The people who organized this," Danny said, "they knew he was there." "I believe so, yes." "Then they knew you had placed him there, which means they have access to your personal decisions, not just your official network." Veth Allah met his eyes steadily. "That is the conclusion I have reached." Danny sat back. Outside the window, the morning light was starting to come up, thin and blue gold, touching the angles of her ship. Sale had bent his wire into something that might have been a bird or might have been a person with arms spread wide. He turned it in his fingers and looked at it. "What do you need from me?" Danny said. She looked at him for a moment before she answered, honestly. "Please. I need to transport Sale to the Upper Northern Station, which is outside the city and outside the primary threat radius. The route requires passing through 2 contested transit zones. My own security detail has been compromised. I am not certain which members, and I am not willing to use them until I am certain." The Allied presence here is too limited to request a formal escort without creating the kind of official signal that would alert whoever is watching my communications. She paused. But one corporal traveling with a child and a civilian through the city does not create the same signal. Danny looked at her. You want me to take him? I want to ask if you are willing, she said. It is not a request I have the standing to make officially, and it is not without risk. He glanced at Sale, who had looked up from his wirebird and was watching Danny's face with the same quiet attention he applied to everything, reading him, working out what was being decided. Danny thought about the 8 shots. He thought about the way the boy had held onto 2 of his fingers and then chosen to let go. He thought about what it cost Veth Allah to say the word please and mean it. I'll need a vehicle that doesn't have official markings, he said, and a route through the old freight passages if they're still passable, and someone needs to get me a communication frequency that isn't on the standard Allied channels. Veth Allah reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and placed a small card on the table. It had a handwritten frequency written on it. Then she placed a second card with a route. Danny looked at them, then he looked at her. You were pretty sure I'd say yes, he said. No, she said. I was prepared in case you did. There is a difference. He picked up both cards. They left in a cargo vehicle 2 hours later, Danny in the front with a local driver named Fenn who had been recommended by Kara and who did not ask questions, and Sale in the back wedged between 2 stacks of empty supply containers with a blanket around his shoulders and his wire bird in his hand. Veth Allah had said goodbye to the boy in the garrison, quietly and privately, and when she emerged her face was composed. She shook Danny's hand before he got in. Her grip was firm and brief. There is a secondary contact frequency at the bottom of the route card, she said. If you reach the station safely, use it. And if something goes wrong, Danny said. She held his gaze. Use it anyway. The freight passages were older than anything else in Kethvara's lower structure, built before the city grew up around them, now used mostly by traders who preferred to avoid the official transit checks. Fenn knew them well enough to navigate without lights for the first kilometer, which was useful because the first checkpoint they bypassed was manned by 3 people who were not official city authority, and whose presence on that route was not coincidental. Danny watched them through a gap in the side panel as the vehicle rolled past in the dark, slow and even. None of them looked up. He exhaled quietly. Sale in the back was completely still. He had understood without being told that stillness was required. His amber eyes caught the faint trace of light coming through the vehicle's gaps and held it. The second contested zone was harder. The freight passage opened into a transit hub that had no alternate route around it, and the hub was partially occupied by a group of armed individuals who were definitely the same organization as last night, or connected to it. Danny could tell by the coordinated positioning, the same sloppy confidence in open space, and one of them was wearing a piece of gear that matched something he had seen in the lower district during the attack. Fenn slowed. Options, he said quietly. Danny thought for 4 seconds. Drive through like you own it, he said. Cargo run, routine, don't speed up and don't look at them. And if they stop us, I'll handle the conversation. Fenn drove. The vehicle rolled into the hub at a calm, unhurried pace. 3 of the armed individuals looked up. One started to step forward. Danny had the window down, one arm resting on the frame, the picture of someone who had done this route 100 times and found it boring. Freight for the North Station medical supply, he called out, not loud, not aggressive, just matter of fact. Authorizations in the system under Transit Code 7. There was no Transit Code 7. He had invented it 30 seconds ago. The one who had stepped forward looked at a device in his hand, frowned at it, looked up at Danny, and then looked back at the device. The pause was 8 seconds long. Danny counted every one of them. Then the armed figure stepped back and waved the vehicle through. Fenn did not speed up until they were 3 blocks clear, and even then he brought it up gradually, like someone who was calm and unhurried and not running at all. In the back, Sale let out a slow breath that Danny felt more than heard. "Good," Danny said quietly, mostly to himself. They reached the northern station at mid-morning. It was a clean, low building set into the hillside outside the city's northern edge, staffed by a small crew and monitored by sensors that were not on the compromised network. Two people came out to meet them when the vehicle stopped. Both of them looked at Sale with the relief of people who had been informed and had been waiting and had not been certain. Danny helped Sale out of the back. The boy stood in the morning light and looked at the open country beyond the station, the wide, shallow valley that stretched north, pale grass and dark stone, and a sky that was 3 shades of blue stacked on each other. He stood there for a moment just looking at it. Then he turned to Danny. He raised one hand. He pressed the first 2 fingers of it to his own chest, then extended them toward Danny. Then he touched his own eyes and pointed outward, a wider gesture toward everything. Danny did not know the formal meaning of the signs, but something in the sequence felt clear enough. Something like, "I see," something like, "Because of you I see this." He put his hand on the boy's shoulder for a moment, then he let go. He pulled out the route card, found the secondary frequency at the bottom, and used the station's equipment to send a simple signal. 3 words, "Delivery complete. Safe." The reply came 40 seconds later, 2 words. "Thank you." The debrief took 4 days. Danny spent them in the Allied Operations Building on the east side of Kethvara's Middle District, in a room that smelled like circulated air and old coffee, talking to people who wrote things down, and asked him to repeat himself at intervals that suggested they did not believe the first version. He told the same story 7 times to 5 different people, and kept it factual, which was the only way to tell it without starting arguments about the decisions he had made. The informal assessment, delivered by his direct commander, Captain Lou Graves, at the end of day 4, was that Danny had operated outside his assigned duties in a way that had produced a positive outcome, and that the command would choose not to examine that too carefully given the outcome, but that he should understand his assigned duties going forward and perhaps not redesign them in the field without consultation. "Understood," Danny said. Lou Graves looked at him over the rim of his coffee cup. Lou was 47, had the face of someone who had spent most of those years outdoors in difficult conditions, and had a specific expression for when he was saying one thing while thinking something different. He was wearing it now. "The administrator of the Northern Territories sent a formal communication to the Allied command this morning," Lou said. Danny waited. "She described your actions in detail," Lou said. "Very specific detail. She included the phrase conduct beyond the parameters of duty 4 times in 2 paragraphs, which I think was deliberate." "Probably," Danny said. "She also requested, through official channels, that you be assigned as a liaison to her office for the duration of the current relief coordination period." Lou set down his coffee. "Allied Command approved it this morning. I was informed 40 minutes ago." Danny looked at him. "Don't make that face," Lou said. "It's a real assignment. Liaison work is real work. You'll coordinate between her administrative office and the Allied relief teams. Given that the attacks last night have changed the security landscape significantly, having a direct line between her office and ours is genuinely useful." "I'm not making a face," Danny said. "You're making the face you make when you think something is more complicated than it looks, and you're deciding whether to say so." Danny looked at the wall. Lou was not wrong. "She moves in circles that are politically intricate," Danny said. "Yes. Her own security apparatus may be compromised." "Also yes, which is part of why having an outside liaison is useful to her." "And to us," Danny said, "because she has access to intelligence networks we don't." Lou pointed at him. "See, now you're thinking about it like an assignment instead of a personal situation." Danny looked back at him. "It's both." Lou was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The boy is safe." "At the northern station, yes." "Good." Lou picked up his coffee again. Report to her office tomorrow morning. I'll have the liaison briefing packet sent to your quarters tonight. Danny's quarters were a small room in the Allied residential block, fitted with a narrow bed and a desk, and a window that looked out onto a courtyard with one tree in it. He sat at the desk that night and read through the briefing packet, which was dense with the political geography of Kethvara's administrative structure. The Northern Territories, he learned, controlled roughly 40% of the planet's mineral output and most of the agricultural production in the highland regions. Whoever administered that territory held real power, not ceremonial power. Veth Allah had held the position for 6 years. She had inherited it at 32 when her predecessor, a distant relation, had died. The official record described her administration as effective and stable. Reading between those careful words, Danny gathered that it had been neither easy nor comfortable. He read until midnight, then set the packet down and looked at the courtyard tree, which was bare-branched and probably not doing well. He thought about amber eyes, 2 different pairs of them. In the morning he dressed in clean uniform, took the root card from his jacket pocket and folded it carefully and put it in the desk drawer, then walked to the administrative complex in the upper middle district where Veth Allah's offices were located. Her assistant, a young Kethvaran named Orith who communicated in careful, accented Allied standard, led him through a sequence of rooms that grew progressively quieter and cleaner and more controlled, until they reached an outer office with 2 guards and a closed door. Orith knocked. A voice inside said something that was not in Allied standard. Orith opened the door and Danny went in. She was at the window. The administrative complex was high enough that the window looked out over the lower city and, in the far distance, the line of hills where the northern station sat. She turned when he entered. She looked different here than she had in the garrison. Same person, same controlled expression, same height, but in her own space she had a particular quality of stillness that was not defensive. She was not performing composure here. She simply had it. "Corporal Reeves," she said, "thank you for coming." "My commander told me to," Danny said. Then, because that sounded more blunt than he intended, he added, "But I would have come anyway." Something moved briefly in her expression. "Sit down." He sat. She sat across from him, not behind the desk, but in one of 2 chairs arranged beside the window. It was a deliberate choice in positioning, he understood. Not a meeting between an official and a functionary, a conversation between 2 people. "I want to tell you something else," she said, without official language. "All right," Danny said. "When I received the signal from the northern station," she said, "I had been awake for 19 hours. I had been managing the political fallout from the attacks, coordinating with city authority, reviewing what we knew about the intelligence breach in my security detail, and attempting to locate and remove the individuals responsible." She stopped. "When the signal came, I stopped all of it for a few minutes. I simply sat." She said it plainly, without drama. Danny understood that she was not telling him this to produce a response. She was telling him because it was true, and because something had shifted in the accounting she kept of who deserved to know what. "I'm glad he got there safely," Danny said. "He's a remarkable kid." "He is," she said. "He has been since he was born. He observes everything. He understands more than most people think he does because most people look at the deafness and then stop looking at him." Her voice was even, but something in it ran deeper. "He has been mine to care for since he was 2 years old. His parents were killed in a transit accident in the Southern Territories. I had no family left by then either, so we became each other's." Danny was quiet for a moment. "He trusted you very quickly," she said. "Sale does not do that. He watches for a long time before he trusts." "He didn't have a lot of options in the moment," Danny said. "He had the option of being afraid of you," she said. "He chose not to be. He is never wrong about people." The room was very quiet. Outside, far below, the city moved through its morning with the sounds of something trying to recover from the night before. "What do you need from your liaison officer?" Danny said, returning them to practical ground with a deliberateness that she seemed to appreciate. She leaned back slightly. Honestly, I need an outside observer who is not connected to any of the political networks here. Someone who can see things in this office and this situation without the framework that everyone inside it carries. She looked at him. I also need someone who is not afraid to tell me when I am wrong. Danny raised an eyebrow. That's an unusual thing to ask for. I am aware, she said. Most people who occupy my position surround themselves with people who confirm their decisions. I have done it too, and I think it contributed to the breach that put Sale in danger. I would like to stop doing it. Danny looked at her. She held his gaze without any particular effort. She was simply someone who had looked at a problem clearly and arrived at a solution she did not entirely like and was going to implement it anyway because that was what honest people did. All right, he said, I'll tell you when you're wrong. Even if I argue with you. Especially then. She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded once, with the finality of a decision made. Welcome to the Northern Administration Liaison Post, Corporal Reeves, she said. The position comes with a resident office space, access to the administrative communication system, and the right to attend any meeting I attend. It does not come with a pay increase, because that is handled by your own command structure and is not my business. Fair, Danny said. And she said, almost as an addition but not quite, Sale will return to the city in 3 days when the security clearance on the northern route is confirmed. He will be in the administrative complex, which is as secure as anywhere here. He has asked through Orith, who knows enough of his signs to manage basic communication, whether you will still be nearby. Danny thought about that for a moment, the small hand around 2 fingers, the deliberate letting go. Yes, he said, I'll be nearby. Something settled in her face at that, quiet and real, and she looked out the window for just a moment at the hills in the distance. Good, she said, then we have work to do. 3 weeks into the liaison post, Danny figured out who had breached Veth Allah's security detail. It was not a dramatic discovery. It was the kind of thing that came from reading the same documents several times and noticing that one communication log had a timestamp that was 4 minutes ahead of the server time, which meant it had been composed before the event it was supposedly responding to. Someone had made a record to cover a gap, and they had been slightly too careful in a way that looked exactly like being not careful enough. He put the document on the table in front of Veth Allah at 8 in the morning. She read it twice, set it down, and sat very still for 11 seconds. Captain Doral, she said. It was not a question. She had already arrived at the same place. Yes, Danny said. Doral was the deputy head of her internal security, had been for 4 years, and was therefore the person who had the most complete picture of her personal decisions and schedule, including the decision to place Sale in the northern shelter. He had an exit meeting with a trade representative from the Southern Coalition 2 days before the attacks, Danny said. I cross-referenced his travel record with the signal traffic on the compromised channel. They aligned to within 1 hour. Veth Allah looked at the document again. Then she looked at Danny. Her expression was controlled, but there was something behind it that was not, something that had to do with 4 years of trusting someone incorrectly. I was going to tell you last night, Danny said, but you had the council communication to deal with, and I didn't want you reading this while you were managing something else. She was quiet for a moment. That was thoughtful. I had a feeling it wouldn't be a small reaction. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted just slightly in a way that might have been gratitude or might have been something more complicated. You were right. Doral was removed from his position that afternoon. The process was efficient and legally precise, the way Veth Allah handled everything she had decided on. There was no public drama, no announcement. He was gone from the building by end of day, and the matter was in the hands of the city authority by evening. She told Danny about it in 2 sentences at the end of the working day, and then moved immediately to the next item on the briefing stack. Sale came back to the city on a clear morning 4 days after that. He arrived at the administrative complex in a vehicle with 3 reliable guards that Veth Allah had selected personally from outside her existing detail. Danny was in the outer courtyard when the vehicle pulled in. Sale got out, looked around, found Danny, and walked to him at a pace that was more controlled than a run, but had the energy of one underneath it. He stopped 1 foot away and looked up. Danny held out his hand, not in greeting exactly, just offering. Sale took it, 1 firm grip. Then he let go and smiled, small and real, and turned to look at the administrative building with the same cataloging attention he gave everything, like he was already learning it, already filing it somewhere. He settled into the complex with remarkable ease. He had a room adjacent to Veth Allah's personal quarters, and within 2 days he had mapped every significant space in the building. Orith continued to be his primary translator, but Sale had also started developing a shorthand with Danny directly, combinations of expression and gesture that were not quite any formal sign language but communicated clearly enough for most things. When Danny got something wrong, Sale would do it again, slower, with the patience of someone who had been misunderstood enough times to have developed a method for it. The work of the liaison post turned out to be genuinely complex. The attacks had changed the political dynamics of the relief effort, and Veth Allah was managing relationships with 7 different council factions, while simultaneously trying to restructure the compromised elements of her security network and keep the relief coordination running at sufficient capacity to prevent a supply crisis in the northern agricultural regions. Danny's job was to be the thread between her office and the Allied command, translating in both directions, not just language but context, what the Allied teams needed to know to do their work, what Veth Allah needed to understand about how the Allied structure actually functioned versus how it appeared on paper. He was good at it. He had not expected to be specifically, but he was. Lou Graves called him at the end of the 2nd week and asked, in Lou's particular oblique way, how things were going. Danny said the work was useful. Lou asked if he was managing the complexity of the position. Danny said yes. Lou said that was good, and that the Allied command was pleased with the level of communication coming from the Northern Administrative Office, and that they considered the liaison post a success. Also, Lou said, the administrator has submitted a request to extend your liaison assignment through the end of the relief coordination period. How long is that? Danny said. Current estimate 4 months, could be longer. Danny was quiet for a moment. Is that a problem? Lou said. No, Danny said, no problem. He could hear Lou's specific silence that meant Lou was deciding not to say several things he had thought of. Good, Lou said, and ended the call. The evenings were the quietest part of the complex. Most of the administrative staff left by early evening, and the building settled into a different kind of activity, smaller and more personal. Danny usually worked late, reading briefing materials or writing communications, and sometimes Veth Allah worked late too, and occasionally they ended up in the same room by proximity and convenience, the way people do when they share a space long enough. One evening, about 3 weeks in, they were both in the outer office when the power in the district flickered, which it did with some regularity as the grid continued its slow recovery, and the room went momentarily dark and then came back up at half power. In the dimmer light, the city outside the window looked different, softer and more settled, the scattered lights of the lower district like something scattered on purpose. Veth Allah was looking at it. She had a cup of something warm that she had been drinking since early afternoon and had not finished. My predecessor told me once, she said, that this city looked beautiful from above and exhausting from within. I thought he was being cynical. He was actually just being accurate. Most cities are like that, Danny said. She looked at him. Have you been to many? Enough, different planets mostly. The relief corps takes you around. Is that why you joined it? He thought about that. Partly. Also, I'm good at being in places where things are complicated and finding the part of it that I can actually do something about. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said, I have noticed that. The light was still low. Outside, something in the city made a sound that was not alarming, just present. The kind of sound a place makes when it is still alive and working on its problems. "You told me once," Danny said, "that Sale is never wrong about people." "I did," she said. "He was right." She looked at him. The careful control that she wore in meetings and during the working day was still there, because it was part of how she was built, but it was quieter now, less deployed. She was looking at him the way she looked at things she had decided to understand rather than just manage. "He told me something about you," she said, 3 days after he came back to the city. "What did he tell you?" She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small piece of folded paper. She unfolded it on the table between them. On it was a drawing, pencil on paper, done with the precise, careful lines of someone who paid close attention to the world. It was a figure, clearly meant to be Danny, in the posture of someone moving forward with something held close. And above the figure, in Sale's tidy hand, he had written 2 words in Allied Standard, which Orith must have helped him with. The words were, "He stays." Danny looked at the paper for a long moment. "He does not write things down often," Veth Allah said quietly. "He says what matters through signs or expression or simply by being there. When he writes it, he means it in a specific way. He means it as a fact he has verified." Danny looked up from the paper. She was watching him with eyes that were copper amber in the low light, and there was nothing performed in her expression now, nothing managed or presented. It was just her, looking at a thing she had decided was real. "I think," she said, careful and honest the way she was careful and honest about everything, "that he is right." Again. Danny looked at her. Outside, the city made its living sounds. Somewhere in the building, Sale was probably taking apart something he had been given and putting it back together differently, because that was who he was. "Yeah," Danny said, "he is." She looked at the paper. Then she folded it carefully, the same fold Sale had made, and handed it back to Danny. Her fingers were warm where they briefly touched his. "Keep that," she said. He took it. The city outside the window was still rebuilding itself from everything it had been through, which was a long and unglamorous process full of small decisions made by ordinary people doing their best with what they had. It was not the kind of thing that made any one moment feel complete. But some evenings in some rooms, with the lights low and the work finally quiet for a few hours, it felt like something that was going in the right direction. That was enough. That had always been enough. Danny put the folded paper in his jacket pocket, where it sat next to the secondary frequency card from Veth Allah's route, the one that had said use it anyway. He had kept that too, for reasons he had not examined too carefully. He figured now that he did not need to.